Go love your own enemies. Don't be loving mine. My enemies are the theocratic fascists. I don't love them. I want to destroy them.
You're a child made in the image of God. Oh no, you're not. You're a faggot. And you can't join your church and you can't go to heaven. This is disgraceful. It's inhuman.
Okay, so we are now going further into myth number 2 from the book Nailed, 10 Christian Myths That Show Jesus Never Existed at All, written by David Fitzgerald. Yes, where did we leave off? We were talking about Jesus' resurrection and ascension into heaven. See no Jesus, hear no Jesus, speak no Jesus, but it leaves no trace in the historical record for nearly a century. Only one of the 4 gospel writers even mentions it. Matthew and John's gospels end with Jesus still on earth. Mark's gospel originally ended at chapter 16, verse 8, with the terrified women fleeing the empty tomb with no ascension story at all. Verses 9 through 20, with the ascension account, were added much later. So, we are dependent on the author of Acts and Luke, who is the same person. Incredibly, the account of the ascension ultimately boils down to just one person who, by his own admission, Luke 1, verse 1 through 2, wasn't even there. Spoilsport skeptics are often accused of unfairly rejecting the miracles in the Gospels out of hand due to their so-called naturalistic or materialistic bias. Of course, the same ones who make this objection have no qualms about freely employing their own naturalistic bias to dismiss the miracles of other religions, but we don't have to rule out miracles a priori, P-R-I-O-R-I, or even make demands such as extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. We can simply observe that extraordinary events tend to have extraordinary reactions, or indeed any reaction. Was there any reaction to Jesus to be found? Call in the eyewitnesses. Many people assume there were scores of contemporary historical witnesses who mentioned Jesus, and this assumption is both encouraged and trumpeted by apologists. The real number is much smaller. Here are the ones cited most often. Flavius Josephus, Jewish aristocrat and rebel general turned historian. Tacitus, Roman historian. Thallus, Roman chronologer. Lucian, Roman satirist. Suetonius, Roman historian. Pliny the Younger, Roman governor. Mara bar Serapion, Syrian letter writer, likely a philosopher, but his actual occupation is unknown. Phlegon, Roman writer. Justin Martyr, aka Justin of Caesarea, Christian apologist. Clement of Rome, Bishop of Rome. Polycarp, Bishop of Smyrna, Asia Minor, not sure if I said that right either. Origen, Christian theologian. Cyprian of Carthage, Christian theologian. Eusebius, I've said this before. Eusebius, Christian historian. That's Eusebius. Tertullian, Christian apologist. Ignatius, sound it out, Diane, except sometimes I can't. Ignatius, Patriarch of Antioch. Clement of Alexandria, Christian philosopher and scholar. Hippolytus, Hippolytus of Rome, Christian theologian and writer. Who was Jesus? Often we see some or all of this group brought out by apologists and simply presented in a laundry list as witnesses of Christ. But what happens when we take a closer look at these so-called eyewitnesses? For instance, what if we arrange them on a timeline with Jesus? Our first problem is where to put Jesus on that timeline. Since Matthew and Luke give conflicting details of his birth, most estimates assume Luke was wrong and go with Matthew, giving estimates a range from 8 BCE to 4 BCE. Equally problematic is the year Jesus died. It's a guessing game based on clues from the Gospels. In a nutshell, it has to be when Pontius Pilate was prefect of Judea, from 26 or 27 to around 36 or 37. If John is right and all the other Gospels wrong, it must also be a year when Passover fell on a Saturday. But most scholars side with the synoptic Gospels against him and look for a year when Passover fell on a Friday, which leaves two possibilities, 30 or 33. That said, the early church was no more certain than we are, and many still had other ideas. But just for argument's sake, let's place Jesus's life roughly between 4 to 8 BCE and the year 30 or 33 CE. Here's how close the written accounts of Jesus come to him. Okay, so 30 or 33 CE is the estimate of when he died. Okay, so time of supposed eyewitnesses to Jesus. Flavius Josephus, 37, I'm not sure what the C is, -C, period, 100. Pretty sure 37 comes after 33, okay? Clement of Rome, born, C, 98 through 102. Ignatius, Ingatius, C, 35 through 107. Pliny the Younger, C, 62 through 113. Suetonius, C, 75 through 160 ? Tacitus, C, 55 after 117. Polycarp, C, 69 through 155. Justin Martyr, C, 114 through 167. Lucian, C, 125 through 180. Clement of Alexandria, C, 150 through 211/216. Tertullian, C, 155 through 230. Origen, C, 185 through C, 254. Cyprian of Carthage, C, 208 through 258. And Eusebius, C, 235 through 339. Not sure how to read those dates, I'm sorry. Dates on the timeline refer to the year they wrote the source in question. Dates above are their birth and death. The four names from the list that do not appear on the timeline are Thales. The dates of his life are unknown, but he is believed to have written c. mid-2nd century, as is Phlegon, c. 140s AD. Hippolytus was probably born in the later 2nd century. He was alive in the 3rd century and died c. 235. Very little is known about Syrian Mara bar Serapion, apart from the contents of his single surviving letter. Dates from his composition range from as early as 73 CE to as late as 300 CE. And then there's a chart. Kind of hard to, okay. See, here's Jesus down here. Yeah, timeline, right? Jesus. Here's the names up here. See the gap? See the gap? Nobody was doing anything right there. And then they kind of go, you know. Probably the most recent, the closest one to Jesus is Josephus. The next closest one is Clement of Rome. Then Ignatius, then Pliny the Younger, then Suetonius, then Tacitus, then Polycarp. This is really a bad copy, so I'm trying to read it. Then Justin Martyr, then Lucian of something, then Clement of Alexandria, then Tertullian, then Origen, then... Anyway, you get the picture. Okay. So, all of them born after Jesus' alleged death. So, can you call them eyewitnesses if they were born after his death? That would be like saying that I was an eyewitness to the Civil War. I don't think so. If I wrote an essay, you know, if nobody had written anything about the Civil War and I wrote an essay in school about the Civil War, would that make me as likely an eyewitness? I mean, that's like saying Josephus wasn't, well, it's a little bit more time, but it's kind of the same thing. Anyway, as you can see, none of these supposed witnesses were in any position to give a contemporary eyewitness account of the time in which Jesus supposedly lived, because none of them were even born yet during the period in question. So in the Bible, how do we know that the words in red print were Jesus's? How do we know what words Jesus said? How do we know what he taught? How do we even know where he went from place to place? How can anybody know that? Nobody wrote about it at all until people born after his death. It's all fiction. Anyway, I'm huge, sorry, interjecting. Okay, I'm going to do this again. As you can see, none of these supposed witnesses were in any position to give a contemporary eyewitness account of the time in which Jesus supposedly lived, because none of them were even born yet during the period in question. And even the very earliest of these writings are nearly 100 years after Jesus' alleged birth. If that weren't enough already, the fact is none of the so-called testimonies are very impressive. Few are even talking about Christ in any context. For the most part, they are discussing Christians, not Christ at all. The two that do, or just appear to, even mention Christ, namely those of Tacitus and Suetonius, are just snippets that happen to mention common Christian beliefs of their day in passing, while actually discussing some other subject altogether, not making any grand pronouncements on Jesus' historicity. See the appendix for details of just what they actually said. They should have noticed. But there were many first-century writers, philosophers, historians, and other commentators who had good reason to notice Jesus, and despite apologists' fervent denials, a wealth of their writings still exists today. But these perfectly respectable sources are never on Christian lists of historical witnesses. They include important figures like, oh Lord, another huge list of people that I have to pronounce. Oh Lord. Epictetus, Pomponius Mela, Martial, Juvenal, Seca the Younger, Gallio, Seneca the Elder, Pliny the Elder, Plutarch, Justus of Tiberias, Philo of Alexandria, Nicolaus of Damascus, and more. And these are just the contemporaries. There are still later commentators who we would expect to have mentioned Christ but did not. For now, let's briefly touch on a few of the more significant ones. This is a really, really, really long chapter. Okay, contemporary Romans. Seneca the Younger, c. 3 BCE through 65. Lucius Annaeus Seneca, Stoic philosopher, writer, statesman, and de facto ruler of the empire for many years, had three compelling reasons to mention Jesus at least some point in his many writings. First, though regarded as the greatest Roman writer on ethics, he has nothing to say about arguably the biggest ethical shakeup of his time. Second, in his book on nature, Questiones Naturalis, he records eclipses and other unusual natural phenomena, but makes no mention of the miraculous Star of Bethlehem, the multiple earthquakes in Jerusalem after Jesus' death, or the worldwide, or at the very least region-wide, darkness at Christ's crucifixion that he himself should have witnessed. Third, in another book on superstition, Seneca lambastes every known religion, including Judaism, but strangely, he makes no mention whatsoever of Christianity, which was supposedly spreading like wildfire across the empire. This uncomfortable fact later made Augustine squirm in his theological treatise, City of God, Book 6, Chapter 11, as he tried mightily to explain away Seneca's glaring omission. In the 4th century, Christian scribes were so desperate to co-opt Seneca, they even forged a series of correspondence between Seneca and his dearest friend, the Apostle Paul. It's almost nauseating how dishonest this the early excuse me. Gallio died 65 CE. Seneca's silence was compounded by the fact that his older brother was Junius Annaeus, I have to spell this, Annaeus Gallio, who actually appears in the Bible. According to the author of the book of Acts 18, verse 12 through 17, Gallio was the magistrate who heard Paul's case and threw it out of court. If this is true, it's curious that Gallio never seems to have told his brother about this amazing Jesus character that everyone was so excited about, since Seneca was very interested in just this sort of thing. But Seneca shows no sign of ever having heard of Christians or Jesus at all. It's also strange that even in Acts, Gallio has never heard of Jesus. This makes no sense at all if Jesus was a famous miracle worker, recently executed, who had returned from the dead and remained in Jerusalem for 40 days, as Acts also says. So I have decided I'm not going to be reading the entire book. I might read, if I can find any other short chapters, I might do that. But I don't want to bore people so that they unsub me. And it could be that people are disliking the videos because they're boring. You know, I mean, unbelievably boring. It's like I said, if you're staring at me, especially, it's going to be incredibly boring. You'd have to be doing something else. But anyway, so I'm not going to read the entire book. I might, if I can find shorter chapters, read them, but that's about it. And as for myth number 2, I'm looking at 8 more pages of book here. So I'm not going to read the rest of myth number 2. I'm going to go to the end. But after I read in the last little bit about the contemporary Romans that should have said something or written something down about Jesus, there's also a list of contemporary Jews who should have said something about Jesus but did not. Justus of Tiberias, Nicolaus of Damascus, Philo of Alexandria are the ones listed. Then he lists commentators after Jesus, and there's several pages of that. And then he talks about the Talmud and how some claim that various Talmuds provide evidence from Jesus, and he talks about why that isn't really the case. There's some pages, is the argument from silence worthless? I'm sure that's really good, but again, this is going to be unbelievably long if I read everything. Suspicious silences, there's more about the people, things that, anyway. He talks about Tacitus and Plutarch and various other people. Then he talks about lost critiques. Again, if you want to read all this stuff, I recommend you get a copy. It's on Amazon. It's about $20. I have, when I was still struggling with trying to keep my faith alive, I had several different books that I read. They're in my storage now, so I can't just, it would be kind of a pain to dig through and find them, but I read several different books that had information that I was able to kind of get my information from. This book seems to have all that information crammed into it, so it would be a really good source to own. Lost Critiques is a really good part of the end of myth number 2, because it talks about people who criticize Christianity, and these people, their criticisms were rebutted, and the rebuttals still exist, but interestingly enough, the criticisms do not exist anymore. There's little bits that I want to read that I thought was really good, if I can find it. I like this, somebody named, and I'll have to spell his name, Porphyry of Tyre, Tyre. They claim he was a Christian, but then it says, but that must have been before he wrote against the Christians. 15 books he wrote against what he called, and this is his description of Christianity, a confused and vicious sect. Of course, that's missing now. His 15 books, that's all missing now. Interesting, isn't it? Everything that's against Christianity goes missing. Another one that I wanted to read is further down. They're talking about Emperor Julian, who wrote sharp critiques against Christianity in his scathing satire Symposium. And there's 3 books apparently that he wrote in his philosophical treatise against the Galileans. Against the Galileans, he had written, and I love how he put this, when the practice of Christianity was gaining ground and usurping all men's minds. Doesn't that just make it sound like a virus? When the practice of Christianity was gaining ground and usurping all men's minds. His writings too were lost. As this guy sums up at the end, again, these are only the ones we know about. Add up all the missing pages, books, letters, and scrolls from respected writers of the ancient world, and there is not just a lost library, but a string of evidence of Christians seeking to alter the record to cover up the embarrassing absence of Jesus from secular history. In conclusion, we finally made it to that part of the chapter 2, a century of silence. Why didn't anyone notice Jesus? As we can see, it's ridiculous to say we just don't have many records surviving from the alleged time of Jesus. The truth is, not only did plenty of contemporary historical accounts survive from the first century, but many of these writers were in the right time and place and had excellent motive to have written about Jesus' famous life, teachings, ministry, and miracles. But there is no external corroboration for anything written in the Gospels. If Jesus really lived and died and returned from the dead in the early 1st century, it didn't seem to make an impact until the end of the 1st century. But perhaps there is one Jewish source that does have information about Jesus, or does it? For further reading, the Oxford Classical Dictionary, 3rd edition, Hornblower, Simon and Spawforth, Anthony, editors, Oxford University Press, 1999. Okay, so that's as good as I can get with myth number 2. Again, myth number 2 was that Jesus is so amazingly, wildly famous, but there was no reason for contemporary historians to notice him. Okay? You made it through. Give yourself a pat on the back. Yay! I'm actually thinking I might make a video today that has nothing to do with this book, so we'll see. If you've been watching, thanks. Bye.